Hello and welcome back to another Warcraft lore video. The last time we covered Lor'themar, well, we just kind of left it at the very end of the Cataclysm, and in this episode I'm going to be covering the events of Mists of Pandaria. Just before we get into the main video, it's probably worth saying that I don't have any footage of the max level Horde stuff because, well, I don't have a max level Horde character. That is something that is on the list of problems to be fixed. But anyway, let's get into the lore itself. So in patch 5.1, Lor'themar was summoned to Pandaria by Garrosh. As it turned out, Garrosh wanted to use the power of the Divine Bell to use the Shah to empower the Horde warriors. So later on, Garrosh, Bane, and Lor'themar all met at the Shrine of the Two Moons, and they were discussing this idea of using the Shah to empower the Horde warriors. Garrosh claimed that the Mogu had built a glorious empire using the Shah, and therefore he should as well. Lor'themar did, however, question his logic, saying that the Mogu Empire had fallen over time, be it to the Pandaren, the Klaxi, or even their own arrogant pride. But of course, Garrosh, being himself, said that the Horde will use power wherever it can be found, and that his Horde is not for the weak. Basically, in Garrosh's eyes, if you ain't strong enough to wield the Shah, then you ain't strong enough for his Horde. Lor'themar was then tasked with leading a research expedition into Kunlai Summit. At this stage, they were not 100% sure what could be found, but Garrosh really did like the Mogu way of doing things, so he decided that their knowledge could be useful. Anyway, so as it turned out, the area was far more dangerous than Garrosh had let on. The war chief, of course, was not really put off by the idea of a few dead elves, and there were a few dead elves. The Valley of Kings was a very dangerous place. It was full of powerful Mogu. So later on, at the kind of like little expedition camp that they had, Lor'themar and Garrosh had a bit of an argument, with Lor'themar saying that Garrosh is just going to destroy the Horde in his vision for this perfect Horde that he so badly wanted, that really valued nothing but power and dominance. So later on, players along with some Blood Elves lead an attack into the Valley of the Kings, and then, or maybe it's the Valley of the Conquerors, one of the two, but the intention is to capture Shan Qian, who is an ancient Mogu who was around at the time of a Divine Bell, which was a legendary item rumoured to be of great power. So later on, Lor'themar then travelled all the way back to Silvermoon, where he tasked Ramath with researching into the Mogu, and Ramath then ended up calling in the help of our good friend Kael'thas, who is the leader of the Sun Reavers. Anyway, later on, their final experiment involved opening this special Shah-containing box. This, of course, unleashed the Shah, causing a whole big wave of negative emotions and bad vibes, and this basically kind of took over Kael'thas and Ramath, and they had a little bit of a fight. Eventually, players and the city guard, though, were able to quell the Shah threat. Lor'themar witnessed this event, and afterwards he took a walk with the player. He talked about just how this loyalty to Garrosh's Horde isn't really paying off, and it's not really worth the trouble and risk that it's bringing his people, and he also doesn't like how Garrosh is displaying a lot of the same racism that drove the Blood Elves from the very first alliance, or the alliance in the first place. So eventually he did decide to reach out to Varian, in secret of course, and start some negotiations. So while this was going on in Silvermoon, Shan Qian was being interrogated by Bane and Garrosh. They ended up discovering the location of the Divine Bell, but only to find out that the Night Elves had actually beat them to it, and they basically legged it off to Darnassus and kept it in the Barrow Dens there. So then later on, while Varian and Lor'themar were in talks, Garrosh secretly ordered a guy called Fanlur Silverthorn to travel to Dalaran, then to use the Sun Reaver portal to get into Darnassus, and then claim the Divine Bell and sneak it off, and this guy was actually helped by a Horde player. Jaina, of course, soon discovered this. She was absolutely livid, because from what she could see, it was a betrayal within her own organisation. It, after all, was all orchestrated through a Sun Reaver portal. Now, it wasn't the Sun Reavers themselves, but Kael'thas basically turned a blind eye to the whole thing. She then purged Dalaran of the Sun Reavers, killing quite a few of them and imprisoning many more. Both Ramath and Kael'thas were captured, but they ended up with a bit of a cunning plan and they managed to get out, so good for them. Alright, so next, well, unfortunately Jaina's actions had driven the Blood Elves back to the Horde, much to Lor'themar's dissatisfaction. At the end of the day, Alliance forces had just killed so many of his people and imprisoned so many more that there's no way he could sell it to the general populace. This, a move from the Horde. So it really did drive them back. The Divine Bell was, in his head, purchased with the blood of his people, so he just wanted Garrosh to meet his end, essentially. Because Garrosh's own selfish need for power is what got a lot of Blood Elves killed. And as the leader of the Blood Elves, that's not really cool. So later on, patch 5.2 happened, and Lei Shen began his bid for power. The Horde's answer was the Sun Reaver Offensive, which was a coalition of the Sun Reavers, Magisters, and Rangers, who were all led by Lor'themar. While he did of course want to deal with the entire Thunder King problem, there was another motive. He reckoned that an uprising would happen within the Horde at some point, and therefore he wanted to be armed with the Emperor's weaponry and knowledge. He, along with Aethys and Haldron, who we haven't talked about so far in this episode, but Haldron is the leader of the Farstriders, who are a group of Blood Elf Rangers. Anyway, so the lot of them led the assault on the Kirin Tor, Zalandari, and Mogu forces on the island. Now, notice there that I say Kirin Tor. This is, of course, at the point where Jaina had declared the entire Kirin Tor as being an alliance force. So, Lor'themar ultimately led the Horde element of the attack on Lei Shen's palace in that final solo scenario, and then at the same time, Jaina led the alliance forces. And they did meet, but Lor'themar and Jaina sort of mutually agreed that they would first focus on the Mogu forces and maybe deal with each other if needs be. They eventually did defeat the main Mogu forces, and then there was a bit of an argument with Lor'themar demanding the release of the Sun Reavers held in Dalaran, saying that the theft of the Divine Bell was actually orchestrated by Garrosh. It wasn't him, it wasn't his fault, it definitely wasn't the Sun Reavers' fault. That said, Aethys did kind of turn a blind eye, so it's more the leadership's fault. Now, Jaina said that she will let them all leave and live if Aethys was handed over. Of course, the two of them disagreed each other, nearly ended up fighting each other, but then our good, peace-loving monk friend Taran Zu appeared, cutting the argument short and getting everyone to move on to the real fight, where we, of course, killed a lovely fellow by the name of Shan Bu, who was the leader of the Thunder King's main army on the island. So when the battle was over, they once argued again, but ultimately decided not to fight it out. Jaina said that there would, of course, be no peace while Garrosh led the Horde, and to her surprise, Lor'themar agreed, saying that that is precisely why he wanted to not fight and conserve his strength. The meeting ended on basically better terms than it started, with the two of them exchanging bows and walking away peacefully. So, fair enough, and at this stage, Lor'themar, he knows what's coming, and he definitely wants to be ready for it. So his ultimate plan did succeed, and they actually managed to get a large stock of blood golems. These are like the miniature anima golem people, which would be very useful down the line in the eventual fight with Garrosh, or at least in his mind they would be. So later on in patch 5.3, vol'jin was actually forced to start the rebellion without the direct help from Lor'themar, because Lor'themar and his main forces were still finishing up business on the Thunder Isle. Lor'themar was then involved in the Siege of Orgrimmar. After the defeat of the Shav Pride, he, along with Jaina and Sho, arrived at the vault. That's where they noticed the original Gorehowl had been left behind. And then afterwards, they all travelled to Bladefist Bay and then met up with the other rebellion forces, and then basically helped blast down the doors of Orgrimmar, and, then they just sort of chilled out, had a few pina coladas, and then after we killed Garrosh, they all decided to turn up. So the final bit of interaction is after the defeat of Garrosh, and actually after the patch 5.4 cinematic, the end one, with the Horde. If you're a Horde player, when you talk to Lor'themar, he says that he finds politics exhausting, and that he thinks vol'jin will lead the Horde well. But then he glances at he glances at Sylvanas, and he comments that, well, vol'jin will certainly hold the Horde, lead the Horde well, but that's only if he can hold them together. He is not very convinced about Sylvanas, and you actually see the same thing mirrored by a few Alliance leaders. Sylvanas is definitely a tad very unstable at the minute, and she has an uncomfortable amount of power with the new Blight, which is very powerful. She has a few Valkyr floating around the place, raising up new forces for her, and no one knows what happened to the body of Arthas or the shards of Frostmourne. I'm not too sure how they would have found their way into her hands, but there's certainly a storyline that could happen there, the entire Lich Queen storyline that a lot of people have been talking about. I think it would be a very interesting story, actually, but I'm not too sure how they could sort of tie it up into an expansion. Anyway, that is it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed making it. If you want to support the channel, you can check out my Patreon page, and then you can also find my social media links, my Twitter and things. I love chatting with people on Twitter. It's probably the best way to get a direct line to me. But anyway, with all of my links and things plugged, that will be it for me. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.